It's so good to see you all here this morning. Before I get started, I know a number of you are concerned about this. TCU will go to the national championship playoffs. I was waiting for that. Several of you were telling me they're waiting to hear from somebody at home, and so the word came out this morning at around 11 o'clock or so. So that's kind of fun. And while it doesn't really matter, I mean, football is football, and it's what it is, and it's a commercial thing, and yet it also has a story to it, right? And if you watched the football game, the Big 12 championship yesterday, and you watched Max Duggan and you know his struggles to kind of try to catch the team up with Kansas State, and just the drama that was there, you know, everyone was chiming into the drama, and if anything, it illustrated to us, to me at least, how important stories are to us, how important life as a story is to us, how important we want to see redemption, right? We want to see something happen that's healing, that's restorative. So we kind of tack it onto an outcome, unfortunately, and then we get too attached to it, and then we get sick about it. You know, that's just what we do. We get attached to outcomes. But the story itself is really reminding us that there's something else going on at the very ground of our being that we're all participating in on either side of that football, on either side of the aisle, in the White House, and on either side of where we find ourselves in the church. It's always that narrative that's looking for some way that things are restored and made whole. And that's really what our story is about. That's really what these angel stories are all about. They're really about this presence of something at the very ground of all of our being. And as we talked about it this week, and I said to Brad, I said, you know, I didn't know this particular song we did this morning. I learned it yesterday. I finally got around to learning it, I should say. But I thought, well, why don't we start off every Sunday morning for the next couple of Sundays on Advent with a Christmas carol or a holiday song. It won't even be a carol. It won't be a sacred one as such. It will be a secular Christmas song. We'll just start off with it. Maybe next Sunday will be Feliz Navidad, or maybe it will be I'm not sure. Brad, you're not in here. How do you say Mele Melikiwaki or whatever that one is? Yeah. So it might be that one. But the point is, why do we do this stuff? I've had people come, and, you know, I can almost always look out and I'll see a visitor who's coming. I see several visitors here today, and it's wonderful to have you all here this morning. But I'll sometimes look out and see a visitor after that first song that the band does, which can sometimes be as crazy as, you know, something like Comfortably Numb or Crazy Train, right? And then I'll look at them and go, and it's almost as if they're looking at each other going like, can we leave now? Or what's going on here? Because it's like deer in headlights. I get that. Because it's weird that we do that. And we do these weird, for Advent, these weird sort of parody skits that are, you know, kind of about this morose individual and his overly happy and positive attitude wife, and trying to sort of see past the materialism or the anxieties of the Christmas season. Why do we do all this stuff? And then this mindfulness kind of prayer. Is that really prayer? Why are we doing all? And then we sing these secular songs so much. And it really is all about this story. This story is really what it's all about. It illustrates and tells us why we do this. And yes, it's a story, it's a parable. Well, I think it is. It's not real clear on what happened historically. I'm sure Jesus was born, we know that. There was a historical figure, we know that much. But the stories are only told in 2 of the Gospels, not in 3 of the other Gospels. 2 of the ones we have, plus some of the other newer ones found. But it's not there, it's only in these 2. Paul never talks about it. The Apostle Paul in the early church is not written down for another 50 years or 60 years or so after Jesus' death. Resurrection. Why are the stories there? Because as Jesus would do with storytelling, he would tell stories, and these parables often had more profound truth, even though they were rooted in historical things. Good Samaritan, there were Samaritans. Interesting thing, the Jews didn't think they were good, but here's a story about a Samaritan that's good. There's a Jericho. There are these towns that people walk along that are dangerous. All those things are true. Did somebody actually get beat up, left the side of the road? Priest passed him by, and then a Samaritan was the one who helped him out? But it makes a powerful story, right? It makes us think about something more connective than our divisive minds typically orient around. These stories make us think about something more connective with uncomfortable marginal places than our divisive minds are comfortable with. Does that make sense? So here we have this new story. We have this other story. We have this story about Mary. and she's visited by an angel. Last week it was Zechariah, Elizabeth's husband, visited by Gabriel. Now Gabriel visits Mary. And I think what this is telling us is it's announcing to the world, wake up, God is in your midst. The holy, the sacred, the unfathomable mystery of love is at the very ground of our existence. It's all of it. That's really what the story is saying to us. Mary's just doing about her business. An angel visits and tells her she's the mother of the Savior of the world. Now, anybody in their right mind would go running at that point. Moses, when he was told out of the burning bush, you're going to lead my people out of Egypt, was like, no, you got the wrong guy. There are better people. You know, there are a lot of better people than me. So the story is about choosing those most unlikely places to be the reflection of the most profound messages. People like you, me, all the time, invitations to be reflecting. And Abraham Heschel, the Jewish mystic and philosopher from the 20th century, used to say when people would ask him why he always, talks about the secular instead of the sacred, he would say because there's no separation, there's no difference, it's all sacred. There's nowhere you can go, he would say, that God is not. The ground of being, the creative force of love at the very heart of all things. However you think about this unfathomable mystery that we call God sometimes, or that we try to label, don't get too attached to it. Just recognize it's everywhere. It's at the very ground of who we are. And so these angel stories are really about speaking to that. And we call that the incarnation. It's the way in which the indwelling of divinity is in the midst of everything. And Mary's response is interesting because she echoes the same response. Now, she says here, let it be to me as the servant of the Lord, but then she follows that up with what's called the Magnificat. And she basically says, we'll put the quote up here. She says, my soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit dances with joy over God. God has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. And if you continue to read into the Magnificat, she talks about how Hannah, she's echoing Hannah from 1 Samuel, hundreds of years before, who was also speaking to the fact that reality had become divisive, the Jewish people had come under oppression. There was this divisiveness between the wealthy and the poor. There was a great inequity. And so once again, Hannah was speaking out to how God is come to try to reestablish the balance of how things are ordered. The Hebrew term for that is shalom. I know you think of shalom as just being like, peace to you. But shalom really means let's find the path together to be in right relationship with one another. That's really when you say shalom to someone, you better sit down and visit for a little while. Because you're not just saying, hope you have a good day. You're really saying, are we all on the right path together? That's really what shalom's about. It's about establishing that right relationship here and now. And so now, hundreds of years later, still the same kinds of problems going on in the world, this inequity, this divisiveness, this power struggle, this imperialism. Today we see the remnants, or we see actually not just the remnants, we're still in the midst of kind of a colonial, kind of hierarchical way of being. We still need shalom. We still need this message that God is in our midst. How are we going to respond to that? How are we going to magnify it? What I really love about the idea that she sings is why I love doing secular music and why I do it here, and I hope it's not because you leave and go like, I really love the classic rock music that they do. That's fine. I mean, I like it too. Make Me an Angel. Angel from Montgomery, great song, right? We all know it. We loved it. How many of us have been changed by it? Because that's really what the invitation here is to do, is to allow ourselves to start realizing every opportunity and moment is an opportunity to be transformed, to reflect something deeper. So that when we hear that song, we hear the angst, the human angst that a lot of us probably have felt. But we know there's a lot of people in the world out there also feeling that human angst. That's what doing this is. This is just that practice to kind of develop a spiritual habit of being in the world and paying attention. So that when we begin to connect with things like Mary, we have this response that says, my soul magnifies the very ground of our being. Sounds kind of lofty, but it's really the simplest thing. When I grew up, as you all know, many of you know that I grew up in a dysfunctional musical reality because I grew up with professional opera, My grandmother was an opera singer with the New York Opera, and then she moved back to Fort Worth to raise my mother and 2 uncles. And so she was kind of a little bit resentful of that. She gave up a very flourishing career as a young woman, came back to be a mom, kind of given no alternative. You can see it in some of the poetry she wrote years later, but you also see it in the fact that then she and 2 other ladies started the Fort Worth Opera Association. So if you go to the opera, you could thank my grandmother, Eloise McDonald Snyder, and now I forget the other 2 women's names, but she had a part of that back in the 60s of forming this opera guild and the association and bringing people like Beverly Stills to be featured in the opera for the first time as a solo, as a lead singer, and she was part of that brought her here to do that. And then she started off her career. My grandmother loved opera. I consider it a little bit like childhood traumatic experience. I still wonder if I don't have a little PTSD from having to attend so many operas. It's good for me, I know. Opera's good for you, except that it's a foreign language. But that's good for you too, because now you have to really pay attention to try to figure out what's going on, right? So I grew up with that, and on Saturday mornings, that's where I would be at the matinee when my friends were playing ball outside. And we were enjoying, my brother Michael and I would be enjoying an opera. Interestingly enough, my brother Michael still loves opera, and has been very active in it himself as an amateur. So opera was, on the other side, was here's one of the things I wanted to think. I didn't know exactly what was being said, but if you go back and you look at some of the operas and what they were saying, you start realizing, like in the opera of, not Figaro, The Barber of Seville. Yeah. When you look at one of the characters, what they were singing in Italian, they were saying, "I long to love the flowers." in this one solo that I was thinking back on, I love to extend my love to you, but my love to the flowers, my love to the earth, my love to the sun. It was like a hymn to life that he was singing. Then I go to my uncle's place on Sunday evenings, and he had a friend that was in one of the trailer parks on the outskirts of Binbrook, and we would go out there and we would sit around and he would play bluegrass. He was an amateur bluegrass musician. He played in bluegrass festivals around the area, and I would go with him as a young kid, and I mostly sat outside the circle as they would play. And they would sing songs like Rocky Top, you know that one, once 2 strangers climbed old Rocky Top looking for a moonshine still. Strangers ain't never come down old Rocky Top, I reckon they never will. And my little brother and I'd be going like, why do you think they're stuck up there? Why are they still up there? But if you really think about it, both of those expressions, bluegrass, opera, classic rock, Angel from Montgomery, joyful, joyful, they're all singing of some essence of all of us. They're all singing of that very thing that we all share, which is this longing for connection. This longing to be a part of something that's enlivening, that's connective, that's affirming, that's wonderful, filled with wonder, or that's just flat out silly and fun, because laughter is also good for us. All of them speak to this same thing. So that when Mary sings in response, I went and I looked up the word, the root word for sing, and it's a Latin word, incantare, to like encant, or the literal meaning is to enchant. And incantare literally means to sing into. So as you're bringing it to life somehow. So in the midst of sorrow, you sing into that experience to enliven it. In the midst of your own anxiety, you sing, you create, you sing out. And in the midst of Mary's sudden recognition that she's a part of something much bigger than herself, what's her response? She sings into it. She enchants it. I mean, think about your own songs, your favorite songs. Take a second. Just think of your favorite songs, what you love to listen to, what you spend most of your time listening to. We probably don't give it much of a second thought, but if you stop for a moment, why do you do that? What's the songs you sing in the shower, if you do? What's the songs that roll around in your head? Sometimes it's unfortunate, they're more like earworms and you can't get them out of your head. But they're often songs that we sing, just like stories we remember from our family, or stories we remember from our childhood, or favorite scripture verses. They all point to something deep within us. But what we often forget is that it was never, this whole story of God's being in the world has never been about us individually. Because what Mary is suddenly saying is, once again, God's reminding us it's not about me or you, it's about everybody. And everybody is going to be brought back into relationship, into right relationship. The high will be made low, and the low will be made high, and everything will be brought back into a balance of harmony and peace and shalom. That's what these stories have always been about. And that's what your soul actually is saying when you're singing this desire for longing or this desire for connection. You really are saying what everyone else is saying as well. So the challenge is for us, when we hear these stories, to stop thinking about ourselves. To literally kind of let go of ourselves and start thinking of others. Now, that sounds simplistic, and it sounds maybe a little bit preachy, but here's the thing. I listened to a guy named Father Boyle recently. Before I get to Father Boyle, let's put up this next quote by Rumi. I love this because it reminds me what Mary was saying in her Magnificat. Do you know what you are? You are the manuscript of a divine letter. You're the mirror reflecting a noble face. You're the universe is not outside of you, it is inside of you. Everything that you want, you are already that. It's reminding us that we are already connected. Rumi reminds us that we are already a part of this thing together. So Father Boyle was in an interview I heard. Now, Father Boyle is a Episcopal priest, and he has started something called Homeboy Ministries. Some of you have heard Father Boyle or read some of his books. He has a new book out that's called Forgive Everyone Everything. But I heard him on a podcast this last week, and it reminded me of something about Father Boyle and what he's been about. Because he works with gangs, exclusively with gangs. But his work is so huge now, he has the largest nonprofit gang-oriented rehabilitation program in the world, based out of Los Angeles. But it's fascinating because what he does is, when he talks about rehabilitating gang members, he recognizes this thing that Rumi talks about, that Mary's recognizing here in this story, that these parables tell us, is that at the heart of all of us is this desire to be connected, is this desire to belong. And so he was telling his interviewer, he was saying, I'm not trying to create a community that corrects gang behavior and makes people better. I'm trying to create a community that accepts everybody as they are, because that's the starting place. The beloved community is beloved because everybody's beloved wherever they are, however they are, whoever they are. And that's the hardest thing for us. We expect other people to be a certain way. So we don't see the connective reality that we all share. Instead, we see the bad behavior, we see the thing we disagree with, we see the thing we're uncomfortable with. And so we focus on change. And our criminal justice system is so screwed up. Okay, I'm preaching. But anyway, it really is. It really is, because it really doesn't think in terms of restoring. It thinks in terms of correcting. And even then, it doesn't think in terms of correcting very well. It thinks of just getting out of our sight. And if you think about it, a lot of us are pretty comfortable with that. Maybe too comfortable. The thing about what Father Boyle says, the thing about his work is that he's not going to the margins of society to change. And this is really key. I think it's fascinating. He's not going to the margins of society to change those people. He says, I'm not going there to make a difference. I'm going there to be made different. You see what I'm saying? I got to thinking about this morning. And I started thinking about you all. I started thinking about some of you that I know pretty well and others of you that I'm knowing more and more, and some of you that I've known for years, and I think about who you are and why you are. Because Father Boyle had this wonderful phrase that he says, really our whole point is to get past that place of loving, of just being kind to others, to recognizing that we are now being love-centered. We are simply centering ourselves around love, connecting with it out of this place of love all the time. But to get there, you have to love loving. You have to really love loving. And when you do love loving, you know what you experience? It doesn't matter. I mean, it could be in a really difficult place. It could be in a really frightening place. If you really find yourself loving the loving that you're doing, you suddenly experience joy. You feel like singing. You suddenly feel like singing into this moment, something sacred is happening. Something's changed. So when I was thinking about Father Boyle, I started thinking of Charm. I'm going to just bring up a few names. Get ready. I'm thinking of Charm because I'm thinking of her work that she's done for years with others, in the community, those who have been on the margins, and now with her work with the Homeless Coalition as the chairperson. And she was telling me, volunteers are good and they're helpful, and the board, but you need people to kind of remember the joy that they experience when they are loving, they're loving. The literal joy you experience in doing that. And you know what? It's not that hard to do. You know what's hard to do? Is to remember to do it. Because doing it isn't that hard. The minute you do it, the minute you sit down, you start listening to someone else for their story, and you start getting into their story, you start experiencing this coolness, this sort of like a lightheartedness, this sort of connection, and that didn't take anything. But remembering to do it takes a lot, because we operate out of these sort of fixed places of our own self-focus. I think of Jennifer Jolin, and her son Thomas. I'm sorry, come back again, please. And her work with helping people in adoption services. Her love for families, her love to see people happy, to see children connected with families. That's a beautiful, passionate thing that she loves into being. She doesn't do it because it pays really well. And Thomas's work with special needs camps, and now his own study in college around that area. You don't do it because it's going to make a bunch of money or because it's going to be a big successful career. You do it because you felt something. Somewhere along the line, you felt something. You loved loving, and it suddenly got you somewhere you didn't expect to go. You discovered something at the root of our being. I think of all of that, Peter, when Peter puts a sign back there that says, "Come have lunch with us," he does it because he knows community is profound. The food could be good or bad, but the community is profound. So he's just putting out the notice, come join us. And what's really fun is if you did it, you'd go, oh, I'm not sure I want to do that. I feel a little awkward. I feel a little uncomfortable. I'm not sure. I don't know everybody that's going to be there. They already know each other. But when you do it, you suddenly realize, oh, I've just let go of that expectation so I can be present to what I discover. And you suddenly discover how easy it was to be connected, right? Because you make that risk. We all do that. I think of Lori. Thank you guys, by the way, for doing the drama. We appreciate that so much. I write these things and I give it to them on Sunday morning. Here, do it. No, they get it the day before, but they do a great job, and so I appreciate that. But I think of Lori not just because of her acting background, and Jake, of course, has his acting background, but Lori is a master gardener. Why do you do that? Why do you do that? Because you've experienced something that enlivens you when you're connecting with it. This is what it means to let our souls magnify the Lord. How do we love loving, and how do we participate in that? I want to throw this last quote up here, because we need to wrap it up. And I guess the band can come on up here while we're doing that. Sing this last song. I love this word from Adrienne Marie Brown. Adrienne Marie Brown probably came into better prominence during 2020 and the COVID because she's a writer and she wrote a lot. She's written a lot about Black Lives Matter. She's written a lot about racism and how to connect with one another in these kinds of times. This was an interesting quote that I read the other day from Yes Magazine. If you don't get Yes Magazine, I recommend it. It's a really profound, positive magazine that shows what's happening around the world. People loving their loving into existence possible realities of shalom. And they're doing it not because they're in the church, they're just doing it out there in the world. They're just being Jesus. You ask them if they're Christians, they're going like, I don't have anything to do with Christianity. I'm going like, stop being like Jesus then. Because they're doing it. They're loving into the world and they're loving it into being. So she wrote this era that we're in right now is for visionary death doulas with time-traveling presence, able to stand in this moment full of embodied wisdom from our lived and ancestral experiences and ripe with possibilities and practices for a future that is nourishing for all of us. So what does she mean by death doulas, which is a very strange phrase? We think of birth doulas. We're in a difficult time. We're in a divisive time. And we get in those tendencies to align with where we feel comfortable when what's really being called for are people who've recognized how easy it is to love into existence. But you have to be willing to remember to do it and to take that risk in all of our moments. It's not just about your voting. It's not just about your support financially of different things. It's about being in every moment that you can be, wherever you are, in the smallest moments. Father Doyle said this wonderful thing: stop thinking of the outcome. That's too big a job. Think about this moment now. How am I going to love this moment into greater love? How am I going to magnify? How's my soul going to magnify this moment and the love that's at the heart of it, the connective reality? That's what it means to be this doula of this divisive time, this way of bringing better life into existence. That's when we do that, that's how we experience what Mary's experiencing in this story. I think that's really what they're saying. You want to experience the magic? Take some risks. Get outside of your little sort of self-oriented kind of anxieties and find out how joyful it is to love into being. Amen.